Good morning. Welcome back to Devotion. This week, we're going to be looking at Jesus's core teachings. And I feel like it's important because we're followers of Jesus. And so in my own life, this is the measuring stick I use. This is how I evaluate what is coming out of my mouth and my heart, because the emphasis of my life should be very similar to the emphasis of Jesus's life. So I think looking at his core teachings helps to keep us on track, because it's very easy to get off track with very nominal, trivial, little details when it comes to our faith. And sometimes what we can end up doing is making something super major that is really, really minor. And then what we do by doing that is we exchange what is major and we, as a byproduct, make it minor. So this week we are focusing on Jesus's core teachings. And this week I'm going to go in what I think is order of importance of his core teachings. So these are all his core teachings, but this is my subjective opinion. This is what I think we build on, so we could see each one of his core teachings as like a building block to build a foundation. And the first core teaching of Jesus is found in Matthew 22, verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So the first core teaching of Jesus is to love God and to love others. Now, in this context, we can see here that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were conniving, trying to put Jesus in a corner, in a very difficult place, because according to them, the law is the law, and not one is better or greater than the other. Keeping the Sabbath cannot be greater than honoring your mother and father, and vice versa. And notice they employ a lawyer to go to Jesus, because a lawyer is skilled at debate. So they were very well prepared for this trap. And notice what Jesus replies with. He doesn't reply with technicality. He doesn't reply with doctrine. He doesn't reply with purity codes or rituals. He replies with something that is, at its core, relational. And you can see this theme all throughout Jesus' teachings. The religious system of the day was hyper-focused on rituals, laws, routines to keep yourself pure, making sure you did not deviate from any jot or tittle of the written law and the spoken law. And so maybe we would term them as legalistic. They saw their faith as a legal process, a legal document that they had to abide by. And Jesus's reply has nothing to do with legality. It has everything to do with relationship. And the reason why I believe this is the foundation of Jesus's core teachings is because without this, everything else falls apart. It has to be built on loving God with everything I have and loving other people. If it's not, like Paul says, my greatest works, even being a martyr, if it's not done in love, it's all done in vain. So that's why this is the core of Jesus's teachings, to love God with everything I have and to love my neighbor. And this version that I'm reading from is the ESV, and it concludes with Jesus saying, "On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So in essence, Jesus is saying every other law that you have ever heard, there were over 600 different laws, commands that they had to abide by. He's saying all 600 plus of those commands depend on these two things. If these two things are not what are holding those laws together, it all falls apart. So in essence here, Jesus takes all of the Old Testament, everything that had ever been communicated to the nation of Israel, and he sums it up into two simple statements. To love God, what does that mean? It's relational. So it simply means that it's a deep level of trust, intimacy, and obedience. And then the outworking of that, the result of loving God in that way, knowing God intimately, we cannot help ourselves. Our eyes shift, our perspective changes, and we begin to see other people as image bearers of God, whether they know Christ or not. They are still image bearers. They are made in his image. And so our hearts no longer see flesh and blood. what we see is a sheep that is lost. And if you take the imagery of a sheep represents innocence. It represents ignorance. And so, I mean, I think about Jesus on the cross when he said, forgive them because they don't know what they do, meaning they're ignorant. They're unaware of the real reason of why they're doing what they're doing. And I know for me, when I spend time with God and I experience him, I encounter him, and then I go interact with people, even people that bother me or that, there's a history of pain and hurt, my lens of my heart is changed because I no longer see what they did to me. The first thing I see is not the history I have with them. The first thing I see is not trying to avoid them because they annoy me. The first thing I see is an image bearer of God, a sheep that may be lost. And so my heart goes from being hard and closed to very open and receiving, which is just simply a mirror of the way that God is towards me and towards you. I think that the biggest thing for us today is that Jesus's intention here was to dismantle a hierarchy that was based on legality and to establish one based on relationship. The temptation in this is that we hear this, I need to love God and I need to love others. And we begin to make it into a legality. We cannot do that. This can't be a obligation or a pressure or, I have to love God and love others if I'm going to fulfill, God's commands. That's not the way of the Spirit. The way of the Spirit is through relationship. It's humbly submitting myself to God as my Father and communing with him, praying to him, reading his word, allowing these things to seep down into the very center of who I am. That's how I begin to know him. And that's how I begin to love him with all of my heart, my mind, my soul, my strength. And as a byproduct, then I begin to love my neighbor as myself. It has to be an overflow of my life, not a legality of law.